Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I thought I would shift gears a little bit and read from Luang Por Sumedho. This is from the anthology Don't Take Your Life Personally. And I'll read 2 talks this evening and 2 talks tomorrow. This one is titled Starting From Here. And this is the collection that I think I read from it earlier, my earlier readings, and it's at the these are put together over it's about 18 years, I guess, of from 1989 to 2006, and it's at the Leicester Summer School, so University of Leicester's Beaumont Hall, and there were Buddhist Summer School with various teachers from different traditions, and these are the talks from Luang Por Sumedho. And there is, I think there's at least one of the talk, maybe it's this talk, where he references another Buddhist teacher who was also had just given a talk. So this one's titled Starting From Here, and was given 31st of July 2001. Compose your minds, look inwards, and become aware of the here and now, the body, the breath, the mental state, the mood you are in, without trying to control or judge or do anything. Just allow everything to be what it is. For many people, the attitude towards meditation is one of always trying to change something, always trying to attain a particular state or recreate some kind of blissful experience remembered from the past, or of hoping to reach a certain state by practicing. When we practice meditation with the idea of having to do something, however, then even the idea of practice, even the word meditation, will bring up this idea that if I'm in a bad mood, I should get rid of it. Or if the mind is scattered and I'm all over the place, I should make it one-pointed. In other words, we make meditation into hard work. So then there is a great deal of failure in it because we try to control everything through these ideas. But that is an impossibility. Geshe Tashi, who's a Geshe Tashi Tsering of Jamyang Buddhist Center in London. Geshe Tashi yesterday was saying that the idea of going off to the cave is very attractive because there you have more control, really. You don't have to talk to people or get caught up in confusing worldly sensory impingements. As you settle into solitude, you experience a level of tranquility through lack of sensory stimulation. It's a form of sensory deprivation. That tranquility, however, is easily disturbed. You can't sustain it when sensory impingements start pounding away at you again. And then you get into, let me go to my cave, that kind of mind, and you begin to hate people. You see them as a threat. Here they come again. They're going to disrupt my samadhi. But this cannot possibly be the way to liberation. The other extreme is to think that you should not go off to the cave and practice meditation. Just be natural, let everything happen. Which is true if you can do it that way. But if you don't even know what is natural yet, it's difficult to trust yourself. The word meditation covers many mental experiences, but the goal of Buddhist meditation is to see things as they are. It is a state of awakened attention. And this is a very simple thing. It isn't complicated or difficult or something that takes years to achieve. It is so easy, in fact, that you don't even notice it. When you think in terms of having to practice meditation, you are conceiving it as something you have to attain. You have to subdue your defilements. You have to control your emotions. You have to develop virtues in order to attain some kind of ideal state of mind. You might have images of a lot of yogis sitting in remote places on mountaintops and in caves. Even a Buddha image can convey this sense of remoteness and separation if you don't understand how to use that particular icon. And it all sounds very remote and very far from what you can expect from your life as a human being. In developing an attitude towards formal practice or daily life practice, therefore, we very often separate the two, the formal and the daily life. We think of formal practice as a very controlled retreat situation where we all live by a routine, a structure, and then we leave that structured retreat. We refer to daily life meditation. But that can seem hopeless, can't it? If we compare daily life with a very controlled meditation retreat, it's very different. But we can't live in that controlled structure as an ongoing experience. Geshe Tashi made this point last night when he said, the real challenge is to develop attention, awakeness, in the flow of life. This doesn't remove the option of going on retreat or diminish the value of that in any way. The point is to look at meditation as awakeness and awareness throughout daily life in whatever way we live and in whatever conditions. There is in that the sense of allowing things to be in this present moment, allowing whatever way the body is or the emotional and mental states right now to be the way they are. Just be the observer of whatever is. Right now the mood is this. I feel this. Just be aware whether you're confused, indifferent, happy, sad, uncertain, or whatever. Be that which allows things to be what they are. For the next few minutes, try to look inwards with this attitude of observing your mind, your mental quality, your emotional quality. What you find might be very precise, like anger, or it might be something that is very sharp. A lot of our emotions are just nebulous, amorphous wandering things. But just put yourself in this position of the Buddha, Buddho, the knower, the sense of awakened attention, not the judge, but simply looking and noticing what kind of mood or feeling you have right now. When you start noticing, really listening or paying attention and sustaining an awareness on just this mood or this mental state, you become aware of bodily tensions, maybe feelings of bewilderment, or maybe not quite knowing what you're supposed to be doing. But if bewilderment is there, be aware of bewilderment as a mental object. Put yourself in the position of the Buddha, the Buddho. Your emotional state and this, what am I supposed to be doing, will then be seen as a mental object. Relax into the present. If you try too hard, you put yourself into a state of tension. So it isn't a matter of making too much effort, but neither is it about not trying at all. It is rather a question of using just the right amount of attention to listen. Just enough to be open to this present moment. If you force it, if you try too hard, you don't relax. Of course, if I say relax, that can also mean lax, and you just fall asleep. So take it to mean just letting go and not having to do anything or get anything. Awareness or paying attention is not a gaining situation. It is not something to be done in order to get anything or achieve anything. This is not a worldly state that we have to get. We are not being encouraged to get our samadhi, nor is it a matter of proving anything. That generally goes with the fear that we won't be able to do it. Maybe I'm one of those people that will never get enlightened, is another one we all sometimes revert to. I don't expect to get enlightened in this lifetime. I just don't have what it takes. Well, don't believe that one either. There are all kinds of stress reduction programs around these days because modern life moves too quickly for us, actually. We're propelled by high technology and all the rest of it into stressful, fast-lane lives, whether we like it or not. And this does affect us. We get a sense of being driven and feel restless and tend to distract ourselves endlessly, which then creates tension and stress. When we do that to the body, however, it creates problems for us. Relaxation is therefore something that is encouraged now in our society, just on a popular worldly level. I was listening to a recording recently of a woman teaching relaxation. She said she could not use the word relaxation now because people try to relax. So she uses soft, gentle tones of voice instead. Soothing, soothing. This is an expedient method. Words and techniques are meant to help us. They are not like commands or things that we obsess ourselves with. Any kind of meditation technique, or even the language that we use, is not to be taken as a commandment to relax. Relax, in terms of stress reduction, would not help very much. What does relaxation mean to you? I can't tell you that. But it is the ability to let go of the obsessive tendencies of feeling we have to do something. It's the ability to let go and let life be. I've got to get something I don't have. I've got to get rid of things that I shouldn't have. These are subconscious influences, as Geshe Tashi was saying last night. They're underlying influences which are so deep that we don't even notice them. That is why the word relax can turn into another thing we have to do. He says, I have to relax. I should be able to relax, but I can't. What's wrong with me? This is where just allowing things to be the way they are comes in. Simply allowing tensions to be. Even if you're stressed out at this moment, let it be the way it is. Let whatever mental state you're in, even your compulsive tendencies, your obsessive tendencies, be what they are rather than seeing them as, there's something wrong with me. There's something I have to get rid of. Allow even the bad habits, the bad thoughts, tensions, pain, sadness, loneliness, or whatever, to be at this moment. Allow the sense of letting go and let life be what it is. We seem to have problems in the Western world around guilt. This is very much a cultural tendency. In Thailand, where I lived for many years, not many people seem to have this same obsessive feeling. They knew when they had done something they shouldn't have done. They felt the same sense of shame when they told a lie and so forth. But they didn't hold to this sense of shame to the point of it becoming a kind of obsession in the way that we seem to. We feel guilty about just breathing the air or being alive, and it can go into neurotic tendencies. This is just my particular reflection on it anyway. The Dalai Lama said that Tibetans basically like themselves. They have a sense of self-respect. You can see this actually. One of the things that many of us Westerners find attractive in Asian countries is the fact that people seem somehow happier there. They're more accepting of life, don't seem to look at things in such a complicated way. I certainly enjoyed living in Thailand. Somehow life there became easier for me, even though in many ways it was more difficult because I was having to learn a new culture and a new language. On an emotional level, however, I found it easier. And Ajahn Chah had an unquestionable acceptance of things as they are and of me as I was. I never felt like that in the United States. I never felt accepted or acceptable as I was. I always felt I should be better. If I were in a good place, I would think, well, I could be in a better place than this. The tendency towards guilt and negativity therefore means that one never feels good enough, no matter how hard one tries. In America, you are brought up with this sense of living up to high-minded role models and ideals. You're always looking high up and comparing the realities of what you are with some ideal of what you should be. So you always come off feeling inferior. How can it be otherwise? There's no way out of that one. We are not ideals. This is not an ideal. This is the reality of flesh and blood, nerves and senses. It is all sensitivity. This is not like a Greek statue sculpted in marble and perfect in form. The Greek statue does not have to deal with nerve endings, toothache, old age, or anything like that. It is an ideal, an icon, like the Buddha image. It is perfect. In the case of the Theravadan school, the Arahant, fully enlightened, is the ideal. The tendency there is to take the word Arahant and place it on a pedestal of idealism so that it remains remote and too high for us. We just cannot relate to it. We merely worship it from down here and maybe feel better for doing so. Looking up and worshiping an ideal can be inspiring, can make us feel good, but then when we come back to ourselves again, to the way we are, what happens in our lives with our families, children, husbands, wives, neighbors, governments? In community life, like at Amaravati, we are living with basically good people, and it is a very nice life, a well-supported life. Yet the suffering just with the personality conflicts is endless. This person doesn't get along with that person, and that one doesn't get along with someone else. But I can't imagine that it will ever be possible to solve these problems by everyone developing the same personality. Allowing things to be what they are is the attitude I have found most helpful. Allowing my own mental states, the way I am on a personal level, my emotional habits, my personality in any of its aspects, good or bad. This also allows me to accept other people for what they are. It is a question of starting from here. If I can't do it here, I won't be able to do it with others. Sometimes how we criticize others is really a reflection of how we look upon ourselves. Ajahn Chah had this attitude about meditation being a holiday for the heart. We tend to see meditation as something we have to achieve, another thing we have to do and get. But Ajahn Chah would put it in the context of a holiday. So try that. Try seeing meditation in that way. This is our holiday here, isn't it? The summer school is a holiday. But put that word holiday also into the context of meditation. You don't have to achieve anything, get any great insights, attain any high stages, purify yourself, get rid of your evil thoughts or anything at all. We're not trying to judge thoughts in terms of their quality, for example. We're just noting that they're like this. If an evil thought comes up, go and kill Ajahn Sumedho. Just don't do it. Refrain from acting. It's just another thought, isn't it? It is what it is, and will go away. Notice that we like challenges. Some people like to go to extremes, especially younger people. Young monks often want to go to a cave, go on a fast, starve themselves, test themselves by taking on difficult tasks that most people cannot do, because that is part of youth. They make themselves do it. But we can't do that kind of thing for the whole of our lives. We can't always be thinking that meditation is some kind of striving challenge for us. The real challenge actually lies in just being able to integrate awareness into the most ordinary things, into the mundane realities of daily life, into the most unimpressive aspects of what we do every day. This is being aware as a continuum. Being aware of special situations is one thing, but to have a connected awareness, the continuum of awareness, is not so easy. It does take patience. When you grasp the idea of continuous awareness, you want to do it. But the realities are that you get distracted and easily fall back into old habits. So patience is required. One suggestion of how to maintain awareness is to have a sense of humility and simplicity. These things help. There is a monk at Amaravati who tends to strive too hard, then fail, then get depressed, then frustrated by the thought that he needs more solitude, more isolation, and a different environment. He thinks there are too many distractions at Amaravati, too many people. One way I have of handling this is to be grateful for the moments I am mindful. If I get caught up in the life of the monastery, pulled this way and that, and I'm not very mindful, then suddenly I remember. And I treasure that. I value that rather than think, oh, I'm trying to be mindful, but I can't do it, and beat myself up because I vowed in the morning to be mindful the whole day, but failed. I would go into these states of, oh, there I go again, I shouldn't have done that, and nag myself, criticize myself, and feel like a failure. But even if there is only one moment in the whole day when I am mindful, I can feel this, thank you. To me, that is more helpful than beating yourself up, because that doesn't help you in any way. Meditation is not a matter of success, of being able to achieve goals and prove yourself. Remember that. Our emotional habits are often built around success and failure, elated by success and depressed by failure. The way to transcend that, however, is through awareness, just in this present moment. The simple act of attention, this listening, openness, and receptivity. Then there is a sense of relief, such a relief. The next talk was given August 4th, 2004. It's titled Unshakable Stillness. Meditation is the beginning of breaking down the conditioning process, but it's not getting rid of it. It isn't a rejection of conditionality. Until you can separate yourself from the conditions of body and mind, however, you will be caught in changing conditions and have no perspective on them. That is what is generally referred to as samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death, where we are helplessly caught in the movement of thoughts, emotions, and change, and which for many people, I think, leads to despair. Cultural conditioning is very strong, and the ego, as far as most Westerners are concerned, is stronger than identity with family, country, or clan. The identity of the Asians, on the other hand, is not so fixed on just me or what I think and feel. It is more on the family or clan. And being identified with others on a wider scale can be helpful in dealing with loneliness, because you always have this sense of belonging to a group. In my own cultural conditioning, however, the emphasis was on individuality, on my rights, myself, and my independence. The ideal was to be completely yourself, to be nonconformist. But it was ideals like that that finally led me to an increasing sense of isolation and loneliness. Even though one's family is there, the sense of individuality is asserted as the important issue. And the family or society comes after that, or may be dismissed altogether. My rights, my thoughts, my views usually take precedence. And when that attitude becomes obsessive, one experiences what I eventually felt to be loneliness and isolation. There are good aspects to this, of course, because one is able to do what one wants without feeling bound by the demands of one's parents. I noticed this was not usually the case in Thailand and Sri Lanka, where the influence of the family and the group was so strong, an individual could not assert himself or herself against the group without creating a reaction. By the time I was 30, my cultural conditioning in many ways brought me into a state of despair. I had taken the sense of individuality and personal freedom to its extreme, and what resulted was a feeling of wanting to end it all. In fact, I couldn't imagine just continuing in that way for the rest of my life, just feeling this sense of me against the world. And nor could I imagine finding any happiness in it. Then I became a Buddhist monk, and in the process committed myself to the group by taking refuge in the Sangha, by agreeing to live by the Vinaya discipline. which made me a member of a group of monks. For the first few years of this, as it happened, I was the only Westerner in a Thai community, and that put me in the position of being the foreigner, the tallest, the whitest, and the American. People who came to the monastery would pay their respects first to Ajahn Chah, because he was the big boss, then pass all the monks and bow to me at the end of the line, even though I was just a junior monk. At first I took this personally. I was concerned about it because I didn't feel worthy of that distinction. When I mentioned it to Ajahn Chah, however, he said, well, they're just respecting what you're doing. In other words, they were not just looking at me as someone worthy of respect as a person, because I certainly didn't feel as though I was. I was going through all kinds of angry and greedy states at the time. The monastic discipline can bring up all kinds of things as a result of the restrictions of 1 meal a day, taking only what is given, celibacy, and so forth. I quite liked the ideal of the monastic discipline, actually. I was attuned to it. But emotionally, it brought up feelings of anger as, for example, when I watched the food being distributed once, and there's something there I particularly wanted, and they don't give it to me. I don't ever remember as a layperson feeling such petty reactions, having always been able to choose what I wanted and arrange everything on my own terms. But here in this monastic setting, I was being subjected to the whims and fancies of the group. Luang Por Chah constantly pointed to the here and now, and it was through that continuous emphasis, in spite of a certain resistance to it and being caught up in my own views, that I began to get the point. I began to see what I was doing. I was creating suffering from just little things, from not getting my own way, or not particularly liking the way other people did things. I could just sit and fume for days on end and create utter misery over something relatively minor, something that really didn't matter at all. But eventually I began to notice that I was creating this suffering, this dukkha, by my own obsessions, opinions, pride, and conceit, or by feeling threatened and victimized by the system. It had been so easy to blame others, to say it was their fault, that they were doing it wrong, that they didn't respect me, or to blame the mosquitoes, the climate, the food, or anything. Yet Ajahn Chah never let me get away with any of it, and I experienced quite a transformation when I realized what I was doing. I realized it was me that was creating these perceptions, and began to reflect, I am the creator of my own suffering. And to notice that even if somebody was treating me badly or unfairly, and I had a justified case for blaming them, it was really my anger and resentment that was the suffering. It was my wanting to get even with them that was the problem, my wanting to tell them off, my feeling misunderstood, unloved, or unappreciated. It was actually me who was creating these thoughts and emotions. Much of the Vinaya is about morality, but there is also a social agreement in it about behavior and restraint. When you take the ordination, you have to ask 3 times before they give it to you. Nobody is holding a gun to your head and forcing you into it. And in fact, you have to kind of plead with them. Please accept me, Venerable Sir. And one can leave at any time. The Thai system is quite liberal about disrobing. And sometimes people will ordain for just 1 day and disrobe. Then they say, well, I've been a monk, I've done that. At a monastery like Amaravati, the problems are not really around Buddhism or monastic discipline, because when people enter the community, they agree to live according to the rules and are genuinely interested in the Dhamma. The problems are more about personal issues, and community life gives a very good perspective on that kind of thing. I often reflect on the fact that it is a good community at Amaravati, and it is in quite a beautiful place, and the people are committed and sincere in what they are doing. And yet one can feel such a lot of anger and aversion. It isn't that people break the rules or challenge the Dhamma teachings or anything like that. It isn't around anything on that level. It is more to do with personality conflicts. Using my own personality as a reflection, I can see how the community affects me and how I affect them. This isn't a matter of just sitting there having ideas about how people should be or how they should change their personalities. I've given up trying to do that. It doesn't work. It is rather about observing what irritates or frustrates me, what it is that I like or that appeals to me, and what it is that angers me. Learning from this kind of reflection over the years has given me a level of calm, centeredness, and inner stillness. I have also noticed that when people direct certain kinds of mental states towards me, the stillness can be instantly forgotten and replaced by rage. I know what the conditions are that arouse feelings of anger, but this kind of fiery rage I find distressing. It surprises me. But by reflecting on this rapid anger, I call it rage, I recognize that the people that trigger it off in me usually come from a position of righteousness. They are always right. They always want to say, this is the right way. And they have a judgmental kind of self-righteousness about them. And I also realize that I am quite prone to being like that myself. So somebody else's self-righteousness can trigger off this rage, which is a kind of righteous indignation within me. I've learned a lot from people who provoke these kinds of feelings. I've learned by receiving them in a way that is not just reacting. I listen and notice the feelings that result from contact with them, and then I find a way of using these situations. One can see, therefore, that situations like that are opportunities for learning. Now, the first noble truth is the recognition of suffering, of dukkha. The second is the recognition of the cause of suffering, which is attachment to desire. When this or that monk comes at me in a very righteous way, I observe any feelings of being threatened, or that he has no right to do this. I also recognize my own blindness. He's wrong and he shouldn't be like this. He shouldn't act like this. He should be aware of how he upsets me. I begin to notice the attachment I have to my own views about him and about what should or should not be. I can see a strong desire to ask him to leave because I find his presence difficult. That is the desire for something not to be, vibhava tanha. By just observing the desire to get rid of him or for him not to be the way he is, I can let it go. Just by reflecting on the feeling of not wanting him to be this way or not wanting this experience. So I observe the feeling of not wanting within myself and I allow it to become conscious. Then it loses its potency naturally. It resolves itself in the reality of cessation. What has arisen has ceased. With awareness, then, you recognize when something that is present ceases, its presence and its absence. And the second and third noble truths are in connection with this reflection on the presence of a condition and then the absence of a condition. Thought moves, but the quality of emotion can linger. It is an energetic feeling in the body, a mood or some kind of distress, and then one has the tendency maybe to resist it or try to get away from it. But now I have this welcoming practice. Misery, welcome. This is a skillful means for upaya, for reversing the strong resistance to the feeling of distress. When you think about somebody who has caused you some kind of sadness or suffering in the past, even if they're on the other side of the planet, attachment to that memory brings up the same feeling. I could go to Thailand and think of this or that monk and, oh, there's that feeling again. But we have the opportunity to open to that, to receive it. And this is where words like sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clarity of consciousness, come in. This is where they become very meaningful. In our modern Western world, we seem to idolize intellectual ability, the ability to discriminate, analyze, and rationalize. Yet our discerning faculties are not that highly developed, so we hold strong views and opinions on practically every issue about ourselves, politics, religion, and everything that we think or feel. The discerning ability that comes through intuitive awareness, on the other hand, is not a cultivated state. It is what I might call natural intelligence. This is not something we learn from studying texts or that comes from any conditioned perspective. It is an understanding or wisdom that operates when there is openness, non-attachment, and seeing things as they are. Discernment in the Buddhist context, that is. So instead of seeing the feeling that I tend to put into that category of rage in terms of being a personal flaw or being caused by the fault of another monk, I see it simply as this way, and note that it has a certain vibrating, resonating effect, a certain kind of energy. Using terms like the way it is or this way helps me to recognize and discern it without making any judgments about it, without evaluating it. It is just the discerning of that which is present in consciousness in this moment. And in that discerning, there is the receiving of it. If there is no mindfulness, then I tend to react to the rage. I try to get rid of it or resist it. Whereas mindfulness or awareness allows for even misery, for even a sense of rage or guilt to be what it is in the present. Then I find, much to my pleasure, that in that receptivity there is no suffering. The suffering's gone. It is only when I lose mindfulness and get thrown back into the momentum of habit that I feel suffering. Experiment in life. Learn to apply this paradigm of the Four Noble Truths to the flow of your life. I found it to be such a brilliant teaching. It is useful, practical, and something that one can learn from throughout one's entire lifespan. The point is, we don't reach a state at any stage of our lives in which we just float in bliss. This is a realm of suffering where there is continuous impingement on the senses. The human body itself, the sensitivity we experience, this sense realm that we are conscious of, none of it is meant to be paradise or a place of eternal bliss. Its very nature is change, arising, ceasing, birth, and death. The sensitivity that we experience means that we are constantly irritated by the impingements we receive from the things around us. And that is just the way it is. There's nothing wrong with that. It's pointless just complaining or putting it down in any way. It is simply a matter of recognizing that this realm that one is experiencing as a human individual with a human body, brain, nervous system, and all the different organs and conditions is like this, and to accept it the way it is. Now, when you put it into that context, it would be foolish to say, I don't want it to be like this. That is a desire that can never be satisfied. The way it is can only be like this. And by receiving the way it is, we do not create suffering, even from physical pain or humiliation, not even from the worst possible things that can happen to us. The suffering that the Buddha pointed to in the First Noble Truth was from not being aware, from wanting something one doesn't have and not wanting something one does have. When I first started meditating, the conditioned realm seemed incredibly powerful to me. I reflected on this body, and it seemed overpowering in every way. Just the needs of this physical form and the emotional world that I live in. It seemed to be like a series of tidal waves, tsunamis, that completely engulfed me. And when I heard about the unshakable deliverance of the heart, from the perspective of those early years, it seemed a totally impossible goal to me. I couldn't find anything unshakable. In spite of feeling overwhelmed by the sense world, however, there was something that kept me going. I just didn't want to resign or give up. Even though I wasn't all that conscious of it at that time, there was some force that kept me at it. One can have a love-hate relationship with any conventional form, and sometimes I just hated monastic life. I could get very critical of it and see all kinds of things wrong or silly about it. And yet, in spite of that, there was something in me that didn't really believe any of the criticism. Once I began to tune into the simple immediacy of attention, once I became more confident with awareness, I found that I really respected the monastic life, even worshipped it in a way. It was like being devoted to awareness. Refuge in Buddha, I call it, by putting it into the terms of Buddhang Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha. I began to have this sense of really treasuring and respecting this moment of awareness. At first, it was just like having momentary flashes, and then I would fall back into the old patterns. But as the awareness began to connect, it also began to sustain itself. Awareness is not a created state, so it doesn't depend on conditions to support it. The tranquility practices, on the other hand, I found frustrating because special conditions are needed for them. One would get a sense of peace and tranquility from concentrating on refined objects, but when those conditions had fallen away, one would feel angry, upset, because the conditions had been disrupted. Maybe somebody had slammed a door, or a plane had flown over. I remember one monk would get angry with the birds for singing. Gradually, I began to realize that I didn't really want to live in a sort of sensory deprivation tank for my whole life, just shutting everything out and being the ultimate control freak. This realm is not like that. This is not a tranquil realm, but a sense realm. And sensory activity is always moving and changing, from happy to miserable, from beautiful to ugly, from day to night, from hot to cold, and from beautiful sounds to cacophonous noises. It is just the way it is. To expect to live in a kind of deva realm of refinement and bliss is foolish. I could arrange it sometimes. It is a conscious experience within this realm, though an extreme one, but it cannot sustain itself. You can't depend on it. The Buddha emphasized this awareness which is sustainable. Awareness is natural and not simply an attainment. So it is ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that we don't really notice it. Our cultural conditioning moves towards extremities. We're always trying to get something or get rid of something. On a cultural level, I am conditioned to seeking extremes, to finding interesting things, to getting rid of the cacophonous noises and the ugliness of life, and trying to hold on to the good. There came a point, however, when I began to recognize that awareness is quite empty, and that even though it allows everything in, it doesn't have any boundaries and doesn't control anything. So rather than trying to control forms in order to make myself feel good, I began to accept both external impingements and internal reactions. And as I reflected on that, I noticed that by resting in awareness, I didn't suffer, even if the impingements were miserable. I could feel pain or any kind of irritation to my senses and mind, and yet not suffer in the way that I would if I tried to get rid of those things or tried to change or control them. The way of non-suffering then became clear to me in terms of experience. It is this way, and isn't a matter of getting rid of anything or attaching to anything. There are, I think, always things that we would dearly like to get rid of, like rage, jealousy, or fear. So we might have subtle attachments that seem perfectly all right. As someone who is trying to establish a monastery, I would feel intimidated when anybody accused me of not being responsible. I am from a cultural background where the ideal is responsibility and accountability, of getting the accolades, of being somebody, and having a special ability. And over the years, I have been given honors and honorable titles in Thailand, which then gave me a feeling of having to live up to a standard and be an example to others. Some of these things are quite good in themselves. They are what should be, how you should be. And yet, by attaching to the ideal of, say, being a teacher or the head of a monastery or a preceptor or whatever, it can become an onerous task. One can feel burdened by always having to be the example for everybody, by feeling obliged always to perform in the right way and be the good monk that everybody wants. It wasn't that I was unwilling to do it, but there was an attachment there which I had not quite seen. And the unsatisfactoriness, the dukkha, arose when I felt a sense of resentment at being burdened by always having to be the example, by seeing more monks and more nuns as more burdens, more problems. The whole thing just seemed to increase and multiply. When somebody ordains, they have to say, "I am your burden and you are mine." I'm not sure the translation is all that good, but this is how it generally comes out. The point is, even with the best conditions and the most high-minded intentions that one can have in the conditioned realm, any attachment to them will be the cause of suffering. Even if you create a paradise, a heavenly realm, attachment to it will mean suffering, even from living in paradise. This reflection then points to letting go. Not in the sense of getting rid of or of destroying anything, but in seeing the way one holds and grasps even very good things, even good people or ideals. We begin to see that attachment of any kind is the cause of suffering. We might then, of course, go to the opposite extreme and wonder whether we should just not bother about being responsible anymore. To hell with it. I realized, however, that I wasn't going to attach to that either, because that is still coming from the same position. First the sense, I have to be responsible, and then the reaction, I'm not going to be responsible. It is awareness then that is liberation. In that natural resting in awareness, problems disappear. They're just gone. The sense of myself and the resentment about having responsibilities ceases if I trust in the awareness. And it affirms the refuges because that is what is left. Putting it in an agreed vocabulary, I call it Buddha Dhamma Sangha. But it is what it is. You don't have to agree to the terminology. Since I am a Buddhist, this is the language I use. But one simply recognizes the stillness, the unshakable deliverance of the heart. Akupa jeta vimutta. The still point. One recognizes it through awareness, not through seeking it or trying to get it, but just through relaxing, opening, trusting, and receiving both pleasant and unpleasant experience. I encourage you to trust in your own awareness. Don't believe the perceptions you have about yourself, about whether you have attained or not attained, or whether you can do it or not. Your mind will always create problems about yourself, about Buddhism, about meditation, and about life in general. But don't believe it. Life is what it is. My personality is conditioned to be critical and suspicious, and the personality still tends towards that. I don't believe it anymore, however, but trust rather in the awareness of it. Sometimes I have lovely moments where I find my personality ranting on, and then suddenly realizing that I am not that that is just that thing. I don't make a problem about it, but just realize that there is no self, and yet there is awareness. And awareness is oneness, not two. So there is that sense of oneness. But what is the reality of oneness? Well, you can't think about it, can you? Thinking will divide everything in consciousness. It seems as though there are two, me and you. The appearance is of division. When people talk about oneness or mystical union or use any of these terms that one uses to describe it, however, simply recognize that the words themselves are inadequate. The reality of oneness is recognized through awareness rather than through thought or definition. So consciousness now seems to have no boundary. This form here can be compared to a radio in a way. It picks up things. How I interpret them, though, is according to my karma, according to the way I've been conditioned to think, to see, and to react to sensory experience. It is these things that determine how I interpret experience. The unshakable stillness, which is before birth, before the conditioning, before anything starts happening, is, however, the stronger. It might seem that the senses are the stronger. It might seem that the influence of the body and emotions are so powerful and so overwhelming that getting beyond them would be impossible. And yet, through the power of meditation comes the recognition of the strength of awareness. Awareness holds everything. It is unshakable. It allows and is not a controlling, judging, or manipulating function. It allows even the worst things to be what they are. All conditions are allowed to have their span in consciousness and then their cessation. When conditions cease, however, the awareness does not cease with them, but rather transcends all the conditions that we experience. Sometimes I question how Westerners interpret meditation. I've noticed that most of us start out wanting to shut everything out. At least I did. I just wanted to get out of my misery and thought that by becoming a monk, by going off into the forest and getting away from it all, I would be able to get that samadhi, that concentration. And I did. I lived alone for a year and got into this very fine state. But there wasn't any wisdom in it. And as soon as I left that controlled environment, I just fell apart. It seemed I had become too sensitive, and all the defenses and protective mechanisms had gone. On the one hand, I experienced a kind of bliss, but on the other, when unpleasant things happened, I fell to pieces. Became overwhelmed, even by relatively innocuous things that wouldn't have bothered me in the least before that time. We have this desire for peace, tranquility, bliss. Using drugs is one way people sometimes have of trying to get it. Maybe cocaine and heroin can take you to a kind of beautiful state of emptiness, but when you start taking drugs, you have to take more and more and become addicted. Trying to control the environment can also become a form of addiction. We can become obsessed with trying to keep things the way we prefer and resenting any disruption. I was fortunate to have a teacher who didn't allow any of that. His emphasis was always on ordinariness. He would use this word, dhammada. The word dhamma is day-to-day vocabulary in Thailand and means ordinary, the way it is. So if you ask a Thai what the weather is like, the answer might be dhammada, just ordinary. Anyway, Ajahn Chah never encouraged me to practice heavy concentration, even though I wanted to. I kept trying to move into that, but he would pull me back. Although he didn't actually want to do what he wanted me to, however, something in me knew to trust him. His emphasis was on learning to be with the breath and the body without trying to get anything out of it, without trying to get the jhanas, or trying to heal the body through being aware of it. It was more to do with just being with the posture and the breath the way it is. Later, I became conscious of the sound of silence, this background sound, or is it a sound? Is it rather a vibration? Whatever it is, I started meditating on it and found that it is where I am quite empty. It pervades everything. And if I stay with it, rest with it, the sense of self is gone. The suffering is also gone. And the emotional state I'm in is gone. Not through suppressing any of those things, but just in this natural sound of silence, this natural movement. So I began to cultivate this by recognizing and using it. Since living in England, I have not had much silent retreat time. I used to go off and spend months in retreat, but now it doesn't really seem necessary. It doesn't seem to matter where I am or who I am with. I find it just helpful to work with my life as it happens, rather than thinking I have to go off and do something special in order to get something out of it. And in terms of teaching, I used to have more confidence in technique and in the word practice. Now I trust awareness more, though it is difficult to teach that. I don't want to experience anger and hatred, pettiness and jealousy. I loathe those states in myself. My personality is such that I want to be good, wise, compassionate, forgiving, fair, and all that is best. And I'm very inspiring when coming from that kind of place. Speaking in a positive way from ideals inspires people when you're teaching on a meditation retreat. You have a certain position and can sell these wonderful things. Of course, everybody is quiet for maybe 10 days, and then they leave. When you live in a community, however, it is quite different. You can't hide the blemishes in a community. So in a way, I consider community life to be the real practice. The people I inspire the most, I discovered, are the most critical when I don't live up to expectations. And that can be very painful. I feel I have failed. I'm just a hypocrite. And the self-criticism would come up. With awareness, there came a time when I began to see the importance of making my negative side more conscious. But there was a resistance in me. There was so much resistance in me, in fact, that under certain circumstances, I couldn't hold it. I would just blow it and say something terrible. Then I felt that if I kept resisting this negative side, and not allow it to become conscious, I would die inside. I would become completely petrified with a kind of Botox smile on my face. So I decided to make these negative states conscious, and to do it without directing them towards anybody, without being confrontational. So sometimes I would write out all my angry thoughts, unedited, unexpurgated, in all their meanness and nastiness. I would write and keep writing until I reached a point where nothing more would come. And I realized that that was the end. Then I would read the whole thing through, and somehow, just by making that resistance more conscious, it would fall away. Rather than just suppressing those negative feelings, therefore I had actually resolved them, and I was left with a sense of having released something. Awareness doesn't have preferences, so the nasty stuff belongs as much as the saintly. When it gets into picking and choosing, I don't want the nasty stuff. I want the good stuff. But I can't trust that anymore because I know the result is not liberating. Even calling something nasty, even labeling it, and saying anything about it makes it more than it is. The fact is, it is what it is. So feeling really grumpy and resentful is, you don't even go that far anymore. It just is what it is. This feeling is like this, and if there is no movement towards adding anything to it, if you have patience with it, it naturally ceases. I use this word patience a lot because resistance, that wanting to get rid of something because I don't like it, wanting to get rid of it right now, is very impatient. I've learned to accept and receive uncomfortable, unwanted feelings. I've learned to let them be what they are. If I think about them, they become complicated. Just being aware of this present mood or this energy is enough. By resting here and allowing negative states a right to be, by seeing them for what they are, one realizes they don't have any solidity to them. They don't have any core or essence even. Then one sees them to be just like mist, just empty. Comments, questions?
Forward at a certain point in that talk, Luang Por Sumedho said that at first the awareness came to him in flashes, and then he would proceed from that and fall back into his conditioning, and then over time it gradually became more consistent.
Yep.
Do you have a sense of how to kind of establish that continuity of the awareness?
Well, I think one of the main thing is actually, one is taking note of it, recognizing it, having awareness that, that actually is an alert, aware, present state. And then learning how to trust it. That's one of the things that, of all the spiritual faculties of, say, faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, I think that faith is the least understood and is one of the most important. Not in the sense of faith in terms of a belief, because you don't believe in awareness, but faith, and also just in the English language, faith has all sorts of baggage and connotations. I think the faith is much more of a quality of trust and confidence as opposed to belief. So this sense of really trusting in awareness, trusting in stillness, trusting in spaciousness.
And to put it in the language of the suttas, would that be the same as developing concentration by taking release as the object?
Taking what?
Taking release as the object.
Yeah, that'd be one way of expressing it. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm curious how to understand Luang Por Sumedho's teachings on not trying to get rid of defilements, not trying to purify the mind.
Yeah.
In relation to the Buddha's teachings on not tolerating an arisen wholesome state, and these kinds of teachings. So.
Yeah. And?
No, just trying to understand. Is it just different ways?
It's ways of expression. I mean, the thing is for and I think in particular in a culture that doesn't get completely knotted up about themselves and complicates things endlessly. It's easy to sort of say, don't tolerate an unwholesome arisen state. Do something. But as soon as you put that to a Western mind, and they've got a real project to get going, and torture themselves and torture everybody else around them. So it's not that you don't, and it's not that you don't deal with it, but it's sort of like you've got to, how do you hold this so that I can actually not complicate things and torture myself as a spiritual practice. So these are perspectives that are really important to be. See, again, it's sort of what works and what doesn't work, and what is it that leads to because your basic standards are still there. What is it that leads to increase of wholesome dhammas and decrease of unwholesome dhammas, and what leads to an increase of well-being and a decrease of dukkha. That's a fundamental foundation to be paying attention to.
So would you say that what Luang Por Sumedho is pointing to is more of abiding in that awareness that allows the understanding of these unwholesome states rather than just trying to annihilate them as soon as they are?
Yes, absolutely. That's kind of the critical kind of division there. Is that it's like because the impulse is to just annihilate, right? And something that is not understood, something that is not known, and that's the say the like dukkha. Say that they're like each of the noble truths has an appropriate response or a duty. I mean, the word is gitya, and often a literal translation is duty. The duty that one performs and needs to perform is the appropriate response to dukkha. Is like in Pali, parinyātabhati, it's to be understood. It's to be known. And so often we jump to the second noble truth and try to abandon it, or pana is actually quite a strong word. It's like to abandon, to cut off, to execute, but it's we go to that without having fully known, and as long as we keep skipping over the appropriate response to things, then we keep repeating the same old mistakes.